welcome. So today is the second in our new Core and Cluster Focus Community of Practice series, and in partnership with HNSW and ACHIA. So this series contributes to the joint program of engagement and sector capacity building to support a successful core and cluster procurement. I'd like to particularly welcome Mary Renane from ACHIA, one of my colleagues and comrades on the capacity building program. Mary is going to do acknowledgement of country for us before we move into the main part of the COP. So thank you, Mary. Thank you so much. If we can hear from you now, that would be wonderful.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name's Mary Renane, as Sharon has introduced. I'm the Service Development Manager at ACHIA, at an Aboriginal Community Housing Industry Association. I'm a proud Kamilaroi woman and currently living and working off country at the moment. I'm on Barkindji country out in Wilkenya, and I live amongst the Barkindji people on the Barker, which is the Darling River. I've been here for the past 10 years and have managed the crisis accommodation specialist homeless service here, and until recently, until I moved over to ACHIA. I acknowledge and I pay respects to elders past and present and the emerging, especially those who have taken up the fight to eliminate domestic and family violence and to build on the principles of trauma-informed practices for all DV victims, survivors, and also who I call experts of their own circumstances. I recognise the country that you are on and all of the elders past and present for all of the works that they have done, and especially the Aboriginal women, First Nations. It all depends on the title that you have and that they use for themselves. I recognise and I acknowledge that this country has never been ceded, and the disempowerment of Aboriginal people and race continues. And the trauma-informed practice is a practice that I believe Aboriginal people have always used. So I'm hoping that I will be able to share that throughout my presentation today. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Mary. Thank you so much. Okay, so Mary is actually our first speaker. So I think that I'll begin though before I bring Mary back in and introduce her. I'll talk to the role of DV New South Wales within the partnership to provide the Core and Cluster Capacity Building Program. Our focus is on DFV specialist service delivery and supporting potential and successful tenderers in terms of their need to align to DV New South Wales Good Practice Guidelines. So the foundational concepts and principles in the Good Practice Guidelines specify and support domestic and family violence informed and trauma-informed specialist practice and service delivery. So the models are that are being proposed for the Core and Cluster program and are cognizant with the domestic and family violence sector more broadly speaking, and they are, of course, understanding DFV as a gendered issue, as well as the crucial respect for cultural safety at the core of our practice. So trauma-informed, the importance of trauma-informed principles and practice has evolved over recent years. It's become a term that we're all now familiar with, and it's in recognition of the need for practitioners to appreciate the trauma experiences defining the impact on an individual rather than the event itself. And for DFV and trauma-informed services, taking a do no more harm approach in terms of their efforts to support women and children. So today, in saying that, today we have two wonderful speakers. Our first is Mary Renane. As Mary has just introduced herself, a proud Kamilaroi and Cooma woman. She has more than 18 years. She has around 2 decades experience at the front line of domestic and family violence services in rural and remote New South Wales. And, apart from being just incredibly important and crucial experience in and of itself, having that rural and remote lens over our practice and service delivery in terms of the CoP today is really, really important. She's a mother to 5 and a grandmother to 17, one very little recent addition. Hey, Mary. And she's driven by her passion to see women and children live free from violence, as we all are. Currently, Mary, she is the Service Development Manager at the Aboriginal Community Housing Industry Association and is also a member of the Domestic Violence New South Wales Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Women's Steering Committee. I will mention Carol here, and we'll obviously move to Carol as the presenter after Mary's segment. But Carol Curry from WAGEC is a service manager at the Women's and Girls Emergency Centre and has previously worked as a team lead manager at Nova for Women and Children in Lake Macquarie and for DVCAS as an Aboriginal specialist worker. She's passionate about providing safety and support to women and children through an understanding of DFE as a gendered issue, has many years of experience in this space, in the refuge accommodation space, and we welcome both of them. But Mary, let's start with you and hear from you regarding domestic and family violence and trauma-informed service delivery. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm just going to share my screen.
You've just shared the note screen, Mary.
Yeah.
If you want to just maybe stop sharing and then reopen and you can share the presentation.
Oh dear. Go back to that screen. Just trying to make your screen bigger. Sorry. I have my notes on the same. I have my notes on the same screen as you've just seen. And share. It's because it's behind it. I need to put that down. I'm really sorry, guys. We just did this and it worked perfectly.
It's so fine. We've all been there, I think, Mary. Under the share option, there should be the different windows if you want to select the one with the PowerPoint. There we go. Looking good.
Beautiful. Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate that. Very sorry about that, everyone. So just leading on from the acknowledgement, I have an intro for my slide. So as you can see, trauma-informed, oh look, I've got trauma-informed design and the 5 principles of trauma-informed. It's, as I said, it's been a way over the decades of working a front line for in a specialist homeless service that wasn't a specialist homeless service. It was a safe house. It was safe house / refuge. And for Aboriginal women in the rural and remote. And the principles that we have now on screen, the collaboration, the choice, the trustworthiness, the empowerment, the safety has always been core business. And I'm sorry, I've got my notes over the top of the slide, so I can't see both of them. And so for Aboriginal women, we always had to work in a way that was an holistic point of view, to work with the full family to be able to keep women safe. In doing that, we had to also work with men. And in searching for answers of why and how to eliminate domestic and family violence, sourcing information from our elders was always what I did, and now I learnt. And for an elder man to give me an answer for how to eliminate domestic and family violence for families as a whole, he basically just told me that it was because of our culture being changed. And that to me was a great learning, because I didn't have to be a person that needed to teach anyone how to be safe, because it was in our upbringing. It was there. It was led by our leaders of what we needed to do. And he said it was the change of culture and the laws of legislation that changed our cultural way of dealing with domestic and family violence. And so domestic and family violence in old days was dealt by the men. If there was a DV incident that happened, then it was the men that actually that were the ones that dealt with the incident. And for instance, if there was a DV incident occurred and the woman was bashed, the partner, his penalty was that he needed to face the full family. And the full family consisted of the father and the brothers and the cousins, and physical fights if needed to be, for him to be able to be learnt that he wasn't allowed to bash and flog his partner. And it's through the changes of all the legislations that culture has changed, and that standing of where the men stood actually it then moved. And I know we live in a world where men have now become the main perpetrators, as we're seeing more and more women using safe houses and refuges and reporting. But in doing that, learning that, I was able to, for my work over the decades, was to be able to not educate on the principles and how to keep safe. It was my ways of working with a woman was to build on their already skills that they had, what they had and what they needed. Trauma-informed practices was a part that not re-traumatizing was always a way that was front of mind. So it was always, she was always the leader. She was always the one that taught me how to, what needed to be done in regards to a safety, building a safety plan. And one of the things for Aboriginal women was they'd always return home. So choice of them making, choices and wanting to return home, I had to then learn how to then work to keep them safe while they weren't within the grounds of the safe house. And so when all of the trauma-informed design came out, it was like, oh, I don't have to change too much. And that's what I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to share with you guys today. And any of the questions at the end, hopefully you will have more. I just want to say that, I'm available. So if there is something that prompts up afterwards, then please do not hesitate to call me. So the So what I learned was to become a first responder. And in being the first responder meant that I had to do that in a non-judgmental way. I had to do that in the ways that I needed to be able to assist, and I needed to be able to support, so that before she left, I could give her keys. I could give her information of how to be able to survive back in her home with the new information that was around bringing awareness about domestic and family violence. I also learned this later in years after doing some training, that the non-judgmental part of a worker, especially for Aboriginal people, needs to be removed. It needs to be out of the way for us to be able to allow for choices to shine through, and for them to be able to make decisions for themselves, work with the decisions that they have. And the training that I did later on in years, it was a case study of a woman that was, she was walking through a park one late evening, and she was pulled into a dark area and she was raped. Now, because this was a public place, when she got to court, the question that was asked was, well, why didn't you yell out? Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you scream for help? And it was later on, through lots and lots of debriefing and talking, that she realised and remembered one reason why she didn't do that. And that was because she wanted to protect two young girls that was walking with their mum, that was coming towards her. If she would have seen out, she could have placed them in danger. I know that story resonates when it comes to domestic and violence and why people don't leave. But it's the same for Aboriginal women. They have so much that's going on that they can't make quick decisions. And it's unfortunate for Aboriginal women, and I've had this said to me actually, when we choose a partner, we choose them for life. And we're not, I'm not saying this is for any other culture. Please do not say, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying it's not something that is readily thought of, oh, well, he's done this, now I'm going to move on. So being a first responder, we need to take into account all of these things. When they come into our services, they're already been disempowered. They've already been on the losing end of, not because of the incident or what's happening from the other side, but from themselves, because now they have to give more of themselves. And everything about an Aboriginal woman or an Aboriginal person, as now she needs to be the one that's disclosing everything. And it confirms a lot of things that other people think about what Aboriginal people do and how they live and how they should live and all of that. So it brings in a whole lot. So they're disempowered. So those choices and those empowerment and those key principles of trauma-informed designs needs to be front of mind for services. Lots of questions. And I have no idea my audience, if it's echoes, if it's Aboriginal services, if it's non-Aboriginal services. So I'm just talking to you from an Aboriginal manager that's managed an Aboriginal service, and the breakdowns and the gaps that I see, and hopefully you will get some things from them. When it comes to disclosure, the one thing that's always front of mind for Aboriginal people is our history, is the stolen generation. Am I going to be now talking in a way that's going to be misinterpreted, and I'm going to have my family as well as others now are going to be removed? That in itself, as an Aboriginal person in an Aboriginal community, in an Aboriginal family, is more than just a family breakdown. That is something that is loss of culture, loss of everything that would be already known to, and I know I'm talking to, the choir when I say that if you're removed out of your family, if you've moved away, the losses that you have of that family unit, that community unit. But for Aboriginal people, family is more than just your immediate family. It's community, it's connection to the next communities. It's our kinship and our communities. They are so intertwined and connected that, from Queensland to South Australia to New South Wales, we're all connected. And just having one person do one thing disconnects all of that. So as she's coming in to disclose, and she's coming in to tell you her story of what's happening, she's got to take on board of all of the unknown, of all of the collaboration that's going to happen now to bring in for her safety. And it's her safety that is paramount, and we know that. And I'm not saying do not do that, but I'm saying I want you to take into mind, this is, if you see where the disengagement starts to happen, of her of her not sitting and looking directly at you, or you see that she's fiddling or whatever it might be, it's because she's struggling with the thoughts that she has. She knows she needs the protection. She knows you're going to get her involved with all of the networks, the police, the health services, who's going to find probably more, because now she's had more to disclose, or she's got to disclose more. She's so much more vulnerable in making the choice to come to the services, because even when she do return home, if he ends up in court and ends up in jail and is removed from the families, that actually places her more vulnerable as well. And she's the only one that knows why she's more at risk. So you're interviewing strategies and tactics, strategies that we have, again, becomes an issue for women, for Aboriginal women when they come into the services. It's really hard for someone with low-level education, and I'm not saying all Aboriginal women are low-level education, but someone that is in a DV crisis is really, like I said, is taking on so much more than they need to. And they are presenting with more the same as the case study of things that they never even thought about. And it's those techniques and those interviews of how you would be able to get her to feel comfortable, to be able to sit and just sit still, to be able to say she's safe. She's really worried that you're going to that services, and I'm talking Aboriginal services as well, because we're all funded DCJ, and they're all worried about our reporting mechanisms and where their information and their data is going, how we report. You're interviewing strategies should be more of a yarn than more of sitting and writing to a paper. And I know there's so many courses out there that teaches so many other ways of being able to, do case management. But I always found that case management should never last more than, a case management interview should never last more than a cuppa. We should always be a breath of fresh air every time that we walk through the door, and they are happy to share a little bit more of themselves. So to do that, we need to be listening. We need to be believing them. We need to be present. We need to be making sure that what they're saying, what they're saying is being believed, even if it's community, even if it's families, even if it's somebody that's coming back into your services. They need you to believe them every single time. I've touched on listening. Listening is the key. It really is the key. Aboriginal women will monitor every part of your service to see if they are welcomed. If there is just a slightest indication that you are not listening and you are not involved in the conversation and you're hearing what they really want you to hear, they will disengage. Lastly, in regards to taking control, domestic and family violence, to me, I believe, is one word, is control. Is to take ultimate control of a person. We do it in our jobs to break control from the perpetrator, to be able to empower the woman, and we give all of the awareness and all the training and all of the education and what she needs to be doing around safety plans and all sorts of manners that she needs to be doing to take away and learn from. But services can actually become the new perpetrator. Services that have too many rules, that locks people in where they feel that they're locked in, institutionalize them. People make decisions they make decisions to stay. And Aboriginal women are so much more have been controlled. Like I said, the kinship, the community, the family unit, everything is so intertwined. It's always a part of them. They've got to make decisions all the way through their lives. So when they come to our services, we should allow them to be able to think freely. We should allow them to be able to speak to us in a manner that they are the experts of their lives and they know what's best for them and what's best for their children. What we need to do as services is to build on what they already know and how to best give them the new tools the new options, the new choices that we learn. And it's in doing that, you build so much more of a rapport with Aboriginal people and DV victims, survivors, experts of their own circumstances. They will keep coming back. When I said that trauma-informed design practices, principles have always been around and it's always been a way that we've worked, that came natural to me as the manager of a service. I didn't need any training. It was because of the way that I was brought up. And I just want to leave with you is to build on their knowledge. They might come in a way that they have no idea of what's happening in their lives and how bad the situation is. But they are the one that's living with the violence. They are the one that's been living in the communities. They are the ones that have the lived experience. And they have their own answers. You have the tools. You have the extra options and the extra choices. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mary. As always, I first should excuse my cough. It's dreadful, and I'll try and sit on it while I'm speaking, and then I can put myself on mute for Carol, and we'll have to hear that. But Mary, thank you so much, as always. Humbled and privileged to hear from you. I think the quote of the day so far is, it shouldn't take longer than a cuppa. I really love that. And I suspect many might kind of agree with it. But I really appreciate and love and respect how you have focused that discussion and refocused our discussion on the kind of idea that trauma-informed work has been happening for a very long time. You know, it's great that we have terms to hang hats on now, have done for quite a while. But of course, in the domestic and family violence sector, including for Aboriginal families, this kind of practice has been the sort of work that people have been very committed to for a long time. And I really appreciate how your talk also really encouraged us to rethink or reevaluate, or at least be critically aware of the impact of how we are. So taking a look at ourselves and, you know, checking in that, you know, that the kind of work that we're doing is having those positive outcomes based on client, you know, what clients know is right for them, and being the experts on their own stories. Yes, so thank you, Mary. Thank you very much. Some questions are starting to come in, and please, I encourage you all to pop your questions in. I did forget in the introduction to mention that we'll be leaving questions for both Mary and Carol towards the end. But you know, as they come up, as you think about them, so you don't forget who it's for and so forth, please pop them in the chat and we'll be getting to those. And yes, clearly everybody's very appreciative of the work you do, Mary, and your presentation today. So, which brings me to our second presenter, Carol Khoury, who I've mentioned works at WAJAC, has been involved in the domestic and family, though she can tell you more about herself, obviously. Carol has been involved in domestic and family violence work for a long time, as have so many people in the sector, isn't it? It's actually a sector that does have many workers who have been committed to this space for such a very long time, and that's incredibly humbling and admirable. Currently she's at WAJAC and has previously been at Nova in Lake Macquarie, and also WDV-CAS. and having got to know Carol a bit of late, she's certainly remains very passionate about providing safety and support to women and children through their experience of domestic and family violence. So over to you, Carol, and we'll get to hear from you. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so you're still on mute.
Isn't that the classic
Lovely.
Teams meeting thing?
Yeah.
I could have been chatting, mate. Hi, everybody. I'm Carol Curry. As Sharon said, I'm not the greatest speaker, so I talk a lot, but usually in a private setting, so I'm going to give it my best shot.
I never said that. I never said you're not the greatest speaker.
No, I'm saying that about myself. Sorry, Sharon.
No.
See, didn't get that right either. I was very blessed to be born and raised on Awabakal land in Lake Macquarie, and am currently working on Mongol land in Sydney with Wajek at Jeannie's Refuge, which is the 15 families site. I'm going to attempt to share my screen because I've got a bit of a PowerPoint. I did warn Sharon I tend to go a little bit rogue, and I'm probably not as elegant a speaker as Mary. So please, yeah, pull me in if you need to.
Very grassroots and wonderful.
Very grassroots, and I did have to promise not to swear. So if anything slips out, I do apologise. Sorry, Sharon.
I'm sorry too.
Okay. Hang on. No, I won't. Okay. Can you all see that? I'm not very good at sharing things.
If you turn it into, see, you've still got the slides down the side, and that's okay if people can see that. That doesn't have to be a problem. But if you turn it into full slide, people can probably read it a bit better.
Hang on. Let me. Is that better?
No,
because I can't actually see the screen that you guys can see. So.
Oh,
Looks
okay.
like you've shared your whole desktop, so all of your screens. There is an option just to share an individual screen if you just want to share the presentation.
Just the screen?
Yeah, so if you hit share and then windows, there should be a number of windows that are open.
Yeah, way too many.
Yeah, and if you just want to select the one with the presentation, then that'll be
there
all
we
we
go.
see. Yeah, that looks
Is that
right.
it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I warned everybody about this too.
Me too. We're on the same page.
All right, so I thought I'd give everybody a little bit of a background about Wajek. I'm not going to read through everything. I'm just going to sort of talk to stuff. So Wajek is 41 years old this year. So it was started by a woman called Jenny Devine, who very much a grassroots worker, would actually go out and pound the pavement and find women who were struggling, women and children who were struggling and being missed in the gaps of the services that were being provided then. She started a drop-in centre at Redfern, and that drop-in centre, while it's changed locations, it's still running now. During the reforms, Wajek picked up crisis accommodation as part of their package, which includes the refuge I sit in, Jeannie's, which is 15 families, Holly's, a sister refuge in the same area of 6 families, and then a single or women with no accompanying children site at Malachite, which is 15 rooms as well. And we do have 35 transitional properties, I think, and another 10-room property at Piermont. So big changes for Wajek, but they've managed to really retain their grassroots approach and really strong feminist approach to the way we work with women, which I'm very proud to be part of. That's just a little bit about Jeannie herself and the way we really still do things at Wajek. It's very much women helping women, women-led. We're very passionate about making sure women are the forefront of everything we do. Even though we all know we're moving into territory, we've got KPIs, we've got to tick boxes for funding agreements, but Wajek's in quite a luxurious position where we can meet all those requirements, but also work with the women that don't necessarily fit into the boxes of other services. if that's fair to say. And I don't mean to, I don't know, like Mary said, I don't know the audience here, so I don't know whether I'm preaching to the converted or who's sitting here. So, you know, I don't mean for anything that I say to be taken the wrong way. It's just how I feel about where I work and the women we work with, I suppose. So one thing that WAJEC really acknowledges is that, you know, DV is still a gendered issue. And I think, you know, we all know the data confirms all of this, and that, you know, women are three times more likely to experience partner violence. Again, you know, as it says on the screen, I think, you know, this is the information we all know. We all know the stats. We all know who we're working with. We all know why we're working with them. I think that we should always come from a place of do no more harm in that. I think for the LGBTQIA plus survivors especially, there's lots of work to be done in the DV space. And I know there's really passionate advocates out there, including women in WAJEC, who are working within that space at a higher level than me. We are very lucky to be working, you know, we have some trans women come through our service quite a lot of the time. We've got a pretty good network with support agencies down here. We work with a lot of called women. Just a bit of a breakdown about where the site I sit at the moment. Out of 15 families, we have one Australian-born woman who also happens to be Indigenous. The rest are women from other countries. So, and I think we've got about 8 different countries represented in that demographic at the moment. 6 of those women have nil income, which I think is also a very wonderful space for WAJEC to be able to provide service in, because I know a lot of SHS funded services can't afford to support women experiencing violence with no income because of their precarious visas. And that, I think, is definitely a gendered issue as far as even those visas are concerned, and the lack of support that they get. Yeah, sorry. We're already going rogue, see? I'm bad. Okay, so I wanted to talk to a couple of things. I'm not going to sit here and talk stats. That's not the way I do things. So DV is always going to be, for me, a gendered issue because I'm a feminist. So for me, I'm always going to look at it a feminist lens. And while I agree that, you know, work has to be done with men, and we can't heal this whole thing without everybody involved healing and moving forward. That's just not the space I work in at this present time. I think, you know, so one of the things that I've noticed in the last few years especially is the misidentification as women as perpetrators. And in that, I actually have a life experience story where I was supporting someone and turned up directly after a DV event, not realising that the police and ambulance were still at the premises, and walked into a situation where he was outside being tended to by ambulance because he had a cut on his head. But I walked into the woman who had several broken bones in her face and there was blood everywhere. It was quite a horrific scene. She was actually arrested and charged as the perpetrator of that violence because she had admitted to hitting him at some stage. And because his story was that he acted in self-defense, she actually was charged. She had an ABO put against her, several charges, and was dragged through the court process and misidentified. It wasn't the only event, DV event in their relationship, which had been documented, but because they're treated as singular events, this circumstance, she was actually mislabeled the perpetrator of violence. And I think, we're seeing more of that coming through, that women are, mislabeled, which is very concerning. I think I'm not quite sure how we're going to get around that. That's a policing issue, and we're trying to work closely with the police to educate on that. But yeah, it's definitely a hard one. Child protection is always going to be a gendered issue. The onus, I know it's starting to change slowly, but the onus is always on women to keep the children safe. It's always on what actions she takes. If she, the detriment she does if she talks to him or she goes back to him. And, you know, we all know that financially it's incredibly difficult to be safe outside of, you know, a partnership. And sometimes that's safer in the partnership than outside of it, because financially you're not going to survive, especially in Sydney at the moment. And I think some of the other larger rural areas are incredibly unaffordable at the moment. But also, you know, so we're seeing women become homeless to keep the children safe so they don't lose their children, but then they're in churn through the homelessness system, which, you know, I, for the first time in my career, has the most limited options of getting out of that I've ever seen and ever experienced. And I started out in youth work when I was 18. I'm now 53. Please do the maths. I've been around for a long time, seen a lot of different stuff, but it's the hardest thing to get out of the homelessness system once you're in it, currently, that I've seen. I think child protection is a massive issue in refuge as well, because we have, like Mary said, we've got rules, we've got this mandatory reporting stuff, you know, so we have to be quite sensitive to cultural needs of women parenting in refuge while still maintaining that, you know, what is seen is proper supervision, proper this, proper that, proper this. So I think it's a hard space, and women are predominantly affected by it. And our practice working with women reflects and respects that their experience of DFV is gendered, occurring in a society where norms and structures of society have imposed distinct gender identities, stereotypical gender roles to them. I think that's very prevalent in a lot of the cold communities we work within as well. I think, you know, I remember coming from Newcastle, where coming from Newcastle to Wayjack, where I've kind of landed in this refuge with this beautiful multicultural, you know, population that I hadn't had that much experience working with in Newcastle, and learning so much from that, but realising as a woman in Australia, growing up in Australian culture, compared to a lot of my sisters around the world, I'm really blessed. And I, you know, sometimes feel like I'm fighting the wrong fight in the wrong country, but also pretty aware I wouldn't last in a lot of these countries, because I've had the freedom of speech in this country that I've had, and I can talk out and speak my mind, which is a scary place to be sometimes. But so sorry, moving on. I'm not used to people not interrupting me and keeping me off track. Intersectionality is huge. I think in that practice and service delivery, it's so nuanced. You know, we've got to identify that not only are women being affected by domestic and family violence, we've got everything else that goes into being a woman in, you know, our society and the societies they've come from. So, you know, that ableism, sizeism, you know, all of that judgment stuff being ladled on top of then a domestic violence situation. I think, you know, we really have to listen to individual women about their individual stories on those things, because it could be something, a source of strength for women. Some women, you know, are very passionate about moving through and breaking down barriers and making it a strength in themselves. But we also have to be culturally aware that not all women from all cultures have the same experience as us. And I think part of us as practitioners is being really mindful of when we educate women about what domestic and family violence is as well, because I think we have at times, I can give you an example again. We had a woman who came through a DVRE program. She's from a different culture, but during that short time she was working with DVRE, before she got to us, she had it explained to her what sexual assault was within her marriage, what domestic and family violence was, that she had experienced all of these things, but in that there was no pathway given to assistance to heal from that, to process that. So not only had she left, you know, a relationship which is in her culture not the done thing, she just got lumped with all this information and education about what she had just experienced, although with prior to that, she'd not had even really heard of that within marriage, within her culture. I don't know if I'm making sense, but so I think we've got to be very careful about when and how we impart some of our knowledge and wisdom onto women to make sure that we're not then traumatizing them because we know what they've gone through. And listening to women, you know, especially from other cultures. I'm not from this woman's culture, so I don't even pretend to know. So that humility comes into it, where it's okay to say, I don't know, I don't understand, can you tell me? And in that, I've learned very quickly that every woman from, well, women from the same culture or ethnic background can have different experiences within it as well, because of, for whatever reason. I'm looking at the time now. Oh,
You're all good.
oh
You're all
God,
good
I
to
talk
talk.
really fast when I'm nervous. So if I'm talking too fast, just
Most of us do, Carol. You're doing great.
thank you. And look, and a lot of this too, I want to acknowledge Mary has already spoken to. So I think I'm just sort of talking in a broader context. So victim, survivor, and centered practice empowerment. Such a mouthful, that one. So this is what Mary was talking to. I think is listening to, understanding their experience, believing, you know. For me, it's very much comes down to transparency, and trust equals truth in this space that we work in. And I think without that transparency as a service, we can't create trust. So for me, it is about, from our start process at WAJEC, from our assess and connect right through to, say, when a woman does a refuge intake, we're very honest about the process. We're very honest about it is temporary, our timeframes, our mandatory reporting requirements. So then she can make an informed decision of whether she wants to engage with us or not as well. Because I really never want to be blindsiding women. And I think there's a risk of, if we don't give them all the information up front, we can do that. Yeah, I think, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. That dignity of risk, I think it's a big one. I think it's you know, all we can do as workers is give women information. It's been a very tricky and dangerous space when you start making decisions for women, thinking they can't do things because they're in trauma, things like that. That to me, that's another form of control. You know, like, I don't think we have the right. We need to let women make their own decisions, give them as much information as we can about that. It's their life. They're entitled to make the decisions, whether we think they're a positive one or not. I know I work from a space that I will, you know, if a woman chooses to talk through a decision with me, I'll you know, be very honest with her about what could happen and what might be the consequences of those decisions, especially when it comes to child protection matters, because I think, you know, it's not spoken enough about in our industry sometimes, I think, because it's a really difficult conversation to have. But in that, if we don't let women know, then they may not make a choice that they would make if they had all the information. So I think those yucky, difficult conversations are really important. So we're not blindsiding. And also I think that leads into not being judged. If they know they can sit and tell us their truth, and we work through what we can and can't do, you know, I think that creates that bond and trust, you know, but without building reliance on the service. So I feel like I haven't quite addressed that one properly, Sharon, but yeah, service limits, I think, is a big one too. When I first came to this site, particularly, we have because we have women with nil income, they are traditionally here a bit longer, because we have no exit options for them. And it was interesting to hear Mary use the word institutionalised, because that's actually something I really saw with that. We had a woman here that was here for 3 years, and out of good intent, she was not given any other options like transitional housing, even though she was able to do that. This is exactly where she's gone now, because, you know, she had experienced X, Y, and Z, it wasn't moved on because it might have been hard for her, but she realised she didn't want to raise her kids for another 3 years in refuge. She, you know, had the ability to do things. She was petrified when she left here, which broke my heart, absolutely broke my heart. But she really wanted to do it. She had the opportunity to do it, has done it, and is going great guns, is in our society and functioning, and feels much more like she's part of society than excluded from society on sitting in a refuge site for so long. So, anyway. And shameless plug, all of this artwork comes off the WAJEC website. If you're we do a lot of fundraising. Trauma-informed practice, like Mary said, you know, it's been around forever with women working with women. I think we always knew it. I think it's just had a name. I think we need to be very careful we don't turn trauma-informed practice into a form of knowing better than the client, limiting the client because they've been through trauma. I had many years ago, and actually I only remembered this over the weekend, a woman say to me, I'm not my trauma. My trauma is what happened to me. And it was very eye-opening as quite a young worker to realise that, you know, some women want to move through that space of trauma a lot quicker than others, and can do that. And we need to be, what I see our role is capacity building for them to move through that, heal however they want to heal, not how we think they should heal. You know, some women don't want to go and see a victim services counsellor. Some women, you know, don't want to take the traditional, you know, assistance that we can offer, and that's fine. We always make sure that they've got the information there if they need it, but it's their choice to engage in that or not. I think capacity building to navigate the very bad systems, very bad and very broken systems that we have to work within. Normally I would swear there, Sharon, but I think, you know, that's one of the biggest benefits we can give women right now. The systems we are trying to navigate are really broken. They do not work for most of the women we work with. They're actually quite disadvantaging and really hard to access. So as much of those skills that we can give the women we work with so they don't need us anymore is the best thing I think we can do. So I always work, and WAJEC really works from a perspective of, if we can work with this woman for a short period of time and she never needs us again, we've done our job, because we don't want to foster service reliance, you know, and things like that. And we want women to be able to feel empowered and be able to do themselves. And I think that needs a lot of collaboration from agencies and talking and sharing information when it's appropriate amongst ourselves. And, you know, just giving them every bit of information we can. Sure, I should have said something else. So I think kind of to somehow, I don't know, I don't even know how long I've taken, Sharon. DFV-Informed practice through the understanding of DV as a gendered issue, victim survivor-centred and empowered practice, trauma-informed practice. Sorry, I'm not even reading it right. I'll let you guys read that, all right? Really, the crux of the thing is we as agencies make sure we do no further harm. And I think out of good intent, a lot of harm has come, and there's been a lot of knowing better and making decisions for women that have impacted their lives in a different way than a decision they would have made themselves, out of thinking, you know, we were doing the right thing, or, you know, I've you know, brokerage, for example, sometimes, you know, you hear workers talking about, oh, she spent all that victim services money on her hair or her nails or whatever. You know what, that's what she needed right then. Maybe it's not a good decision. Maybe she should have spent it on bond, but you know what, that's what she needed right then. So then we have to work a bit harder on getting something else. It's all that, you know, that dignity of risk, all of that sort of stuff. But by telling a woman she can't do that, for me, that's a form of financial control. So we have to be very careful not to be oppressing and limiting women by us trying to do good. And yeah, you know, I think we've all seen, and we've probably all been around long enough where you can, you know, it's not going to end well, some things, but it's their choice, their journey. We have to let them do that. All we can do is arm them with information and skills to make it through whatever next step they've got. So, sorry, that's me, I think. I was going to do I want to say one of the things about WageEc is we have some amazing people who do fundraising for us, which lets us work, I was going to say outside, but not outside, but lets us provide services that we couldn't possibly do with just SHS funding. And that is support nil-income women. Like I know a lot of SHS funded services can't afford to support a lot of nil-income women like we do. And I think that also comes from a feminist principle that we know we just need to be doing more, and when not really going to get the money from the government, so we had to go out and beat the street and do it ourselves. So WageEc are amazing at it, but it also lets us fund things like the seed team, and we have, before the CYP money came through, for those of you who got that, we actually still had a child and young person manager. So we're looking at the holistic thing of really trying to make children clients in their own right as well, which is very difficult to do if you're not funded to do it, because it's a unique set of skills. Yeah, well, that's me.
Carol, thank you. Thank you, Carol. It was wonderful. And again, such a humbling and privileged experience to listen to women like yourself and Mary, still doing this work, still so passionate about it, still so committed to it, and really sort of bringing that grassroots refinement to needing to keep our practice in check. So, when we're talking about trauma-informed practice, DFV-Informed, trauma-informed practice, it's new, but it's not new. But probably kind of looking at the fact that, some of the practice that has occurred intentionally or otherwise, often unintentionally, has sort of unintentionally replicated some of those power and control dynamics that actually go on in DFV. And in fact, what you and Mary have highlighted is that DFV practice is the antithesis of that. So women and children have experienced had these incredibly confronting, challenging, routinely painful and traumatic experiences, and that the work we do is the exact opposite, to support them through coming through the other side of that. I really appreciated you focusing on women's own decision-making autonomy, women's own agency, and I think that gendered lens and culturally safe lens allows us that space to come back and refocus on that. That obviously women will at times make decisions that you think, oh, please don't. But it's not our please don't to be saying. So that's been wonderful. We're going to move to some questions, Carol and Mary, if you're both up for that. And the first one was for Carol. I seem to have lost it. Where's it gone?
I think it's from Linda.
Yes, from Linda. To Carol, we had a question about whether your shelters have curfews.
No, we don't currently have a curfew. We do ask that women and children are in reasonable hours so they don't disturb anybody else. But that doesn't necessarily happen. We're working with adults. They're entitled to make their own decisions. They are the wisest people in their own lives. We do have cameras on site in external sites. Anybody who's worked on a crisis accommodation site or a residential site will know that the grapevine's pretty strong. If someone's doing something wrong, someone will probably tell you. And we try to address it through conversation. We do have rules around if perpetrators or men come to the site, we need to relocate the women. So we make that really clear in the beginning, because that then is just another layer of trauma they have to experience of thinking they got somewhere safe. And, you know, we have no choice. That's our policy procedure to, you know, if you're found here, because we're in quite a residential area too. So it's very noticeable if behaviours, you know, men are turning up and yelling and stuff. It's really noticeable in this community as well. And we have 14 other families here to keep safe. So no, we don't have a curfew. But, you know, I know other places do, and some places that works, I suppose. So
yeah, thanks, Carol. And of course, core and cluster crisis accommodation setup is different to communal settings, and our next few COPs are going to be addressing some of those different policy applications, policy developments and policy applications in that space. Curfew is one of them, but we know that some communal refuges do have curfews, and some don't. And you know, not to put a too fine a point on it, you know, obviously, in terms of managing a whole refuge, there are going to be different reasons around safety and security reasons as well, obviously, around that. But that's great. You've got a number of comments, people saying we miss you at Nova, which is very lovely.
Guilty.
And thank you, Rebecca. And Rebecca, a different Rebecca, I think. Yes, a different Rebecca wanting to chat offline with you, Carol. So, yeah. So we can put you in contact there. That's great. I might like to ask a question, please. Both of you have been working such a long time, so in such a committed way in this space, and so and you've spoken about trauma-informed thinking, as you know, as it applies to the DFV space, in a wonderful grassroots applied way, which is just fantastic. But I wanted to ask you about what both of you, Carol and Mary, what your observations might be on trauma-informed practice and its potential for its contribution to the well-being of staff, and even the potential for prevention of vicarious trauma.
I'll go first if you like, Carol.
Thanks, Mary.
I've had many people, like, you know, I've mentioned that it's been 20 odd years that I've been doing it, and I've gone to training, and especially vicarious trauma, but you're still smiling. You know, you're still smiling and working in such a sector that you're only hearing all the sad, bad stories all the time. It's actually because of the principles and, like I said, that lived experience. So wherever I've allowed them to be passed on to professionals, and I don't get to hear the bad stories. I get to be in the seat of the supporter of the vehicle that gets them to the right spot. I've learned how to that's why I mentioned about the case management being a cuppa, time of a cuppa, because it's that core information that you need to be able to pass on. The moment that you get into hearing those stories, that's when you start to live it. You actually start to live in because it's so hard to just go, it's 5 o'clock. I've now got to go home and I've got to now forget what I've just heard. So if you, like we're with the core and cluster, they're saying work with specialist workers. The last presentation that I gave was especially for Aboriginal services, be the bridge. Be the bridge, be the ones that pass them on, be the ones that be the vehicle to get them across to be working. If they've never worked with a counsellor before, you go, you make the relationship, you tell them the experience that you've had of just being able to talk to them and break it down. But it's actually been a living a living way for me to be able to still smile at the end of the many years, because it is yeah, it's just, and that's how you, and so all the staff that I've had come in, I will get them to do the same thing. Don't take this on, don't, because we live in rural and remote communities. We live in communities where there's under 2,000, people live, population. And so the perpetrators, the users of our service, we meet them at the IGAs, we meet them at the clubs, we meet them at the pubs. We're constantly, and so, and taking your work and trying to take off the lenses when you're trying to socialize and stuff like that and trying to relax doesn't happen. So if you can stop it before you actually get to that point and do your work and stay in your lane as the supporting person, it works.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Mary and Carol.
I totally agree, Mary. And I think too, for the woman that you're working with, there's a lot of power in you telling her she doesn't have to tell you her whole story, because there's some stuff we can't do anything with it. I'm not a counsellor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not, so I think there's that real strength in her knowing that, okay, you'll sit and listen to me. I don't need to tell you the details, but you'll get me to a place I need to be to resolve all of that. But she's not being very traumatised by telling her story over and over and over again. And especially for you that you're working with and meeting people, but even in these big cities where you may never see them again, they're entitled to hold their power of their story. So, I think, we had No Wrong Door, which was supposed to stop women telling their stories, but I think they're telling them more now than ever. And I agree that be the bridge is a fantastic way of putting it, because we don't need to know every detail if we can't do anything with that detail. That's just re-traumatizing them. So,
yeah. It's interesting too on the vicarious trauma front. I've often found it interesting that the fact that our sector has always been completely woman dominated in terms of workforce, and those women have, working in the sector, of course, have been raised in the very same unequal society that the women experiencing DFV, and I'm not assuming that women in the sector also may not have had their own experiences of DFV, but I have always found it interesting that when we talk about vicarious trauma, there's it doesn't tend to have that gendered lens over it, and I just wonder if that could be a helpful approach to sort of be thinking of it through that lens as well, because it is a woman. It's a woman-led sector doing work for women and children, so, personally, I just find that interesting. But I've popped Mary's...
that's why we're so underfunded, Sharon.
Yeah. That is a whole other COP, Carol, please. So, look, Mary, you've had a few requests about presenting at a Teams meeting, so I've popped your email in the chat there for those interested in wanting to get in contact with you. And we had a question around from Joe, thinking of avoiding the institutionalised nature of a refuge. Any advice for how this could look in a smaller regional area where the Coram cluster is away from the town, unlike the city-based locations, which is true. So Coram cluster in the regional and rural settings, definitely there are different horses for different courses. Yes, there. So interested in hearing what you might think about that.
Yeah, I'll go first again if you like, Carol.
Thanks, Mary.
Just simply because that's the two services that I've run. So I've run independent core cluster model refuges for the past 20 years. So both in Burke and Wilkenya, in rural and remote, like I said, population under 3,000, Burke, 2,000 here in Wilkenya. And the setting is the cluster, the core, the business centre, the office, and then you've got the individual residential on site. On one site there is 5 5 units, and then as they progress through and they move from high risk to low risk and start to take control back of their lives, there's 2 exit houses within the community, but still connected to the service. So they still have that full-on support until they're actually closed off and they have their own independent housing. Works really well, especially with the Aboriginal women that started it. So both in Burke and Wilkenya, 25 Aboriginal women incorporated a company to be able to start a safe house. And that was because of stopping anyone that was experienced DV to be able to move into having extended family involved in the incidents and putting more people at risk. So with that, those 25 women that started the elders, now all gone, are obviously connected to community. They're, matriarchs of their families. And in both Burke and Wilkenya, I'm not from Wilkenya and I wasn't from Burke, but coming in to work there, obviously, we had incidents where you've got to walk past a safe house to get to the main part of town. And I had once here in Wilkenya where a male turned up to the gate and he proceeded to come through the gate. And I walked out to him and I said, what are you doing? You know that this is a women's centre. And he said, and obviously he was connected to here and he tried to be naive in that, because I was new to the community. And I went, very well, this is only for women. And from that, he was the only one that ever tried to, and I'm not saying that, people come there when you're not there and all that stuff. We have all the cameras, we have all of the gates and monitored and all, with the keypads and things like that. So it's not saying that it doesn't happen, but more so that having the information that it's there and the reputation of why you are there, the reputation of going into, like I said, it was a safe house, but we're still called refuges. Going into a refuge, they would say, you're only there to break families up. No, we're here to stop the violence that's happening. We're here to help her continue to report. And when you place it back on them, so, that's just the way that it's worked, and it's worked really well. The Arana Safe House project that happened with the Women's Refuge Movement, 2005, we was able to have new premises built and move from the communal living. So it's worked really well. Hopefully that's answered your questions, because I'm like you, Carol, I go on a bit of a tangent.
Oh, we all do. I always say I talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles. So thank you, Mary. Thank you so much. And Carol, do you want to contribute something there?
I think Mary's much more an expert in that field than I am, because I've always worked in regional areas. So I think that, actually being out of town is I agree with, I was actually out in Camilla and Reggie Land on the weekend, went to Arana op shops. I loved them. But I think knowing in that, depending on how big your town is, I think Mary's point of everybody knowing what it was, where I've only worked in places where it's been we're in a community, residential setting. So it's a bit different, but yeah. So I don't really don't have the expertise, I suppose.
Thanks, Carol. Thank you. But Joe's also asking to sort of extend that question to when you're in a city, she mentions that when you're in a city, you can walk out the door, get on a bus and get to where you want to be. Can you offer some advice when location context is very different to that urban setting? Avoiding institutionalised refuge when you can't easily practically leave on your own terms. Really, really important point. Yeah. Yeah.
So with the Burke, if you want me to answer that, or just offer some advice,
Thanks, Mary.
when we did the design of the new safe house in Burke, well, obviously the location meant we picked an area where there was exit areas that was not being able to be viewed from the street or from the public. For instance, there was the location that we picked was in the same laneway as the police station. So obviously the back gate had entry point for the police to be able to bring and take and be there all the time, because they were doing their patrols and stuff like that. So just to have an extra gate that's not too public is the best, because obviously people coming in and, you know, everyone in rural and remote communities knows when the parties are happening. You hear about the incidents the next morning. So if someone is getting taken to a refuge or a safe house, community already knows. But in strategically thinking on that, long before we started to work with through COVID, and where we had to have temporary accommodation, it was building relationships with the motels. So and it was to have, especially like there was a caravan park that's outside of out of the town. And so the police would just take them straight away. So we'd had safety plans set up that was already with the police, that if an incident happened, they didn't need to call us straight away. They do what they need to do to protect them, but get them to the safe place. And then we talk to them, you know, after they've had a bit of a spell and had a bit of a rest. So within the 24 hours of going and, you know, I'm Mary, I'm here to support you from here on. But there's so much that you can do with, you know, of being able to hide and get where it's just not in the public's eye. And it's and working in the rural and remote, there's always a street light, you know, that you've got to avoid. Wilkenya has 3-4 streets across. So basically you can stand at the end of any street and you'll see that someone's pulling up in, you know, someone's at work. So we had to think about those sort of things. And but yeah, it can be done.
Isn't that interesting, Mary? That and it does highlight that potential, like around safety and security issues, but that potential clash with women being able to develop their autonomy, isn't it? You know, it's yeah. So around choice, around freedom of movement, it's clear that it can be really complex. Yeah, so thanks, Jo, for those great questions too. Thanks so much. I had a few more. If anybody wants to pop anything, we've got about 5 minutes to go. But I'm going to ask one more, if people are okay with that. I'm going to drop a couple off that I had. But I'm interested, being somebody who's also kind of been in and around this sector, you know, for a long time, like Mary and Carol and like so many in the sector. I'm really interested to know your thoughts on how you feel about doing yourself out of a job.
Look, it's I can't wait for that black and white flag day. I really can't, to wave that flag. And but I have seen glimpses of it. I really have seen glimpses of, and that is through that empowerment. It is through giving back that what's been taken away from them, to be able to make choices. They can protect every part of their body, every part of their family, every one of their families, and every part, because they know the violence. They know if we educate only of what what to look for and the signs. But I mean, they will tell you that's like, I'll just share with one story where I had to sort of just point it out. There was a woman that was living in violence for more than 15 odd years, and she kept coming to the safe house, and she was there 5 days out of the 7. And and I, like I said, that cuppa that I talk about, because as soon as daylight would come and she knew it was safe to go back home, she'd go back home. So I learned how to be able to give tips within, minutes, and make sure that they had the vital information to her. So one of the things that I shared on one occasion was to look for signs. And in one of the signs that she picked up was there was a certain spot that the incidents would have. He would never bash her at home. He'd always take her to his auntie's house. His auntie's house they were elders. They couldn't hear well. The room that they stayed in was in the back room. And as soon as he would get her into the room, well, then he'd lay it into her. And as much as she'd scream or whatever, she had nobody. When I started to talk about the signs, she actually picked up the only time that he does this is that. And on one occasion, they were in a pub and he's buying all the beers, he's getting her charged up and all that, and everything's hunky-dory and they're smiling, laughing and whatever else. And all of a sudden, she orders another beer and he says, "No, we're going." It was just like that. And so she says, "Yep, okay." And so she said, "We'll grab some drinks and chips and that for the kids." He said, "No, we're not going home. We're going to Auntie's house." And
wow.
Yeah, and to Auntie's house was at the end of the block. It was obviously a cornered intersection, and we were around the corner. And around the corner there was the safe house. So she takes off running. She gets to the corner and she runs around the safe house. And I'm at the door and I open the door, and of course he's behind her because he didn't realise that she realised what she'd known now. And here I go on my tangents. Anyway, and so basically she gets there and he's like, "But I didn't do anything." And I said, I'm standing at the door, and I let her in, and he says, "I'm just looking for Sharon." And I said, "No, Sharon's not here." And he said, "Yeah, I was just behind her." And I said, "Well, she must have kept going through." And obviously lying through my teeth. But it was that empowerment. It was she was the only one at that time, and it was all the every time that I had time to be able to go and share something else and empower for them to make choices. It kept them safe. It keeps them safe.
Wonderful. Yeah. Carol, did you want to have anything to say about doing yourself out of a job? It's clearly why we still do this work. Yeah, that we'd all love to do ourselves out of a job.
I'd probably go and work in some fancy frock shop or something and do something nice. But I think like Mary, I've seen glimpses of stuff where worked with women, and then mainly in Lake Macquarie because it's a smaller community, seen them a couple of years later and they're doing well, they're looking well. One in particular I worked with is a very young woman who had her child removed from refuge. Bless her, she kept working with me and we kept moving along. She got that bub back. I've now just been run into her and been introduced to her new child with her lovely new partner. She's doing really well. And, just every now and then I'll run into people and they go, "Remember what you said to me then?" And it's like, no, I don't, because so much comes out of my mouth. But those moments. So look, I think everybody has to have heart that we are making a difference. Every person in this sector does make a difference. You may never see it. If sometimes you're a smaller community, you might get those glimpses of it, but have faith that Even if it's not for 3 years, that bit of information, that bit of advice is going to stick somewhere along the line.
Oh, Carol and Mary, that's just been wonderful. I couldn't be more grateful. I feel so privileged to share this space with you both. I want to remind people about the Survey Monkey that we've popped into the chat, more kind of official, formal part of it. But I think I said something along the lines to you, Carol, the other day, how, you know, when I started fresh-faced and didn't know what I didn't know, but if somebody would have said to me that we'd be having, you know, doing this work or having this COP, you know, this many years later, I would have said, no, that's not going to be the case. So, you know, it's all going to turn out okay. And I think what those little stories remind us is that for so many women, it does turn out okay. You know, in the face of hearing still about the 1 a week dead and, you know, just some of the terrible, terrible stories, there are good news stories in there, and it's the work of the workers in the sector that have those wonderful stories to bring to the table. And what a lovely way to finish off our community of practice today. So thank you both so much. Thank you everybody for your interest, your attendance, your questions.